So the fourth step that I like to share in terms of solving problems in Mimmer is how to go about sketching a diagram to illustrate data and control flow changes as a design strategy prior to implementing your solution by actually writing up the code, right? Now, mind you, there's different ways of doing it, and there's no really good way. Sometimes I just like to take a piece of pen and paper to sketch out my diagram. Otherwise, if you really want to invest the time, draw.io is also a great resource. It's a software that you can freely download in order to sketch, among other things, control flow diagrams, UML diagrams, common diagrams that you might use in some of the later courses. It's a very popular option for drawing graphics, and so I recommend taking a look at that. So that's draw.io as a software that you can install from the web. So if we take a look at problem one, the automated teller machine problem in assignment one, scrolling down and skimming through the values. So we've already gone through the steps of comparing the test cases, generating a novel test case, rereading the problem prompt. In terms of after going over this information, sketching out a solution to this problem, you know, as an initial attempt, I always recommend like you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to spend too much time sketching. But it's really great just in terms of managing your attentional resources to kind of keep track, particularly in terms of the order of operations that you'll need to execute. As later on in some of the later lectures, I'll introduce some control flow structures that you can implement as part of the Java language to go about creating branching scenarios or introducing loops so that you can iterate the execution of certain operations. For now, you can assume that each and every statement is executed once after the other. And so I'll just generally limit my diagrams to just a brief little example of what's going on in terms of the nature of the operation I want to perform, and then describe each step just in terms of the pseudocode. So if I were to zoom in here at the details, just going over a few examples. One solution to problem one for assignment one, assuming that the first value that you want to capture is the string that corresponds to the first name. So I've exemplified that through this box. Includes Eric, a string, the first data value that I want to capture in terms of my input for that test case. And in terms of the step to describe the nature of the operation that I'll need to implement in code, I'll use the following pseudocode. So initialize first name, so the name of the variable, of string of data type string, to the user input, so the input that's read from the console. The following value that I want to capture is Poitras. So notice that in the second step, a separate statement in terms of different line of code, I'll initialize last name, a string, to user input, to capturing the string of 10 digits. So I might initialize item number, variable name, of type integer, to the user input read from console, and then following by two floating point numbers, 8.50 and then 10.0, initializing variables called item cost and cash amount. Both floating point numbers will be captured as doubles, user input read from the console. Following now in terms of the output area, because we only had one processing task for that problem, which was to print out the values. So now being very careful in terms of how you format the output that'll appear in the console. Right, so the first task would be to concatenate the following strings. Customer last first, followed by, and then you'll notice the use of the plus sign to concatenate the string that's held in last name, followed by a space, held in first name, the corresponding pseudocode to print customer last first, combining first name, last name, and then skipping a line in the console. Item number followed by item number. Notice the space here in terms of the string. So the use of double quotes there to just indicate the spaces. Again, if you're using pen and paper, you may want to also make this more obvious by sometimes just underlining that space in pen and paper. Sometimes the detail isn't as precise as using, for instance, like draw.io to come up with these diagrams. So printing item number plus item number and then skipping a line, followed by item cost, displaying the same information, cash amount, cache amount here. So again, concatenating both strings, the string values being held in variables, item cost, and cache amount. So you can take a look at the details there in terms of the pseudocode. So that's essentially the design for the solution to problem one. Taking this pseudocode, you should then be able to implement the code as part of your solution by writing the corresponding statements. The benefit of this strategy is that, again, with that design, you can more easily keep track of all the operations as you write your code. It's much more easier to focus on the syntax and to solve these little syntax issues, syntax errors where they come up, compilation errors. I should be a little bit more consistent with the terminology there, to fix all the compilation errors and get the syntax right. If you have your design plan in place that's just next to you, you can just refer to it, and then focusing also on your cheat sheet that you can download as a reference to get the syntax right as you move along and keep track of all the statements that you have to implement as part of your solution. Very often you'll have to come back and sometimes like revise parts of the diagram as you're kind of debugging and moving down the series of steps, printing out to the console to see what happens behind the scenes. You'll make errors very often, but it's easier to revise your diagram and then to adjust rather than working solely with the code, because of course you have to figure out both the logic and the syntax, and you can make errors at each and every level. At the very least with your diagram, the logic is a little bit more explicit. So it helps you reason about each of the steps and to revise your solution prior to implementing it. So that was my fourth tip. So I'll just finish this series of videos with a few more details in terms of how to adhere to the styling guidelines when writing code and solving assignments in this class. So more on this in just a few moments.